Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question that feels both very old and very new. What if the reality you're lying in right now, the room, the sounds, the slow rise and fall of your chest, is not the base of everything, but a carefully rendered layer inside something far larger? Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these stories, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Imagine a slow, deliberate boot up. First, a hush, then a tiny pulse of light, then the soft hum of a world coming into being. In many ways, that's what some thinkers mean when they talk about the simulation hypothesis. The idea that the universe we experience might be the output of a program, or a layered sequence of programs created by intelligence that exist outside our space and time. This isn't just science fiction. The modern philosophical framework for this idea was sharpened by Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom, who in a short, careful paper laid out what he called a trilemma. At least one of three broad possibilities must be true. Our species goes extinct before reaching a stage able to run realistic simulations. Advanced civilizations choose not to run such simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a simulation. Bostrom's argument doesn't claim proof. It simply shows how the probabilities shift when you accept certain premises about future computing power and motivation. Tonight, in this first chapter, we'll plant gentle seeds. Where did this idea come from? What makes it seem plausible to so many intelligent people? And what the very first questions are that researchers and philosophers ask when they try to make it scientific? I'll walk slowly with imagery and a few small thought experiments you can imagine with your eyes closed. Breathe in and out. Let each point settle like a feather. Chapter 1. Origins, Logic, and the boot-up metaphor. We start with stories. Humans have asked questions about the nature of reality for millennia. Many religious and philosophical traditions imagined layers of existence. Realities nested inside realities. Dreams that were more real than waking life. Gods that crafted the world. The modern simulation hypothesis translates some of these ancient intuitions into a language borrowed from computing and probability. Picture a future civilization with enormous computing power. Imagine gently the slow accumulation of processing ability across centuries. Smaller machines replaced by larger ones, then by technologies we can barely name. At some point, proponents argue, it becomes technically feasible for that civilization to run ancestor simulations. Accurate, high-fidelity reconstructions of the past, including conscious beings who remember a history they never lived. If many such simulations are run, the simple arithmetic of numbers says, there may be vastly more simulated minds than original, base minds. If you close your eyes and picture countless lighted windows in a city, each window a world, it's not hard to get the sense of being one among many such places. This is the core intuition behind Bostrom's reasoning. Now, why would anyone take this seriously? There are several persuasive observations that make the hypothesis feel less like fantasy and more like a hypothesis worth testing. First, our ability to simulate. On human timescales, our progress in computation and simulation is dramatic. Video games and virtual environments have moved from pixelated blocks to richly textured worlds. The argument here is not that we can already simulate conscious minds, but that the historical trend of ever more realistic simulation suggests a plausible path. Tech leaders and scientists have publicly asked the question, if we keep improving, will we eventually be able to simulate a mind with experiences indistinguishable from ours? If the answer is yes, the numbers in Bostrom's trilemma suddenly feel weighty. Public figures have voiced such intuitions. For example, Elon Musk once remarked on the high probability we might be in a simulation, using the arc from primitive games to immersive worlds as a shorthand for the argument. Second, certain puzzles in physics and cosmology. The way our universe begins, the hot, dense moment we call the Big Bang, raises an honest, quiet question. What, if anything, preceded that instant? For many people, the boot-up metaphor is soothingly simple. A program started running, and the rules unfolded. That's not scientific proof, of course, but it's a tidy way to translate a profound unknown into language our modern minds use when we want to explain complexity. Third, surprising mathematical and structural regularities. Scientists point to deep, repeated patterns. The way certain numbers, symmetries, and ratios appear across biology and physics are standing out features of a cosmos governed by rules. Whether it's the golden ratio appearing in spirals or the way conservation laws simplify predictions, patterns suggest a compressible structure, and compressibility is what programmers love. If something follows a small set of rules, a simulation is easier to describe. Here it's important to be calm and reasonable. The presence of order in nature is a natural subject of scientific study, not proof of a programmer's hand. But for some thinkers, the patterns invite a metaphorical reading. Fourth, hard puzzles in quantum mechanics. Quantum experiments reveal behavior that seems to depend on whether systems are observed. The delayed choice experiments proposed by physicist John Wheeler and later implemented in clever variations show that the results of measurements can appear to retroactively determine the behavior of particles, a fact that puzzles and humbles even seasoned physicists. Some have taken this as suggestive. If observation plays a role in how reality manifests, could that be consistent with a rendering process that only fills in detail when required? Again, this is a speculative link, not a conclusion, but it's been influential in making simulation ideas feel less fanciful and more like a serious metaphor to explore. Fifth, unexpected echoes in theoretical work. In the early 2000s, physicist S. James Gates Jr. noticed structures resembling error-correcting codes in certain string theory calculations. Error-correcting codes are a fundamental feature of how digital systems reliably store and transmit information. They compensate for noise and ensure integrity. The discovery made some physicists pause. Why would mathematical structures that look like digital code appear inside equations meant to describe fundamental particles? The answer is not proof. The mathematics can have multiple explanations. But the similarity is intriguing and worth gentle exploration. All these points, the arithmetic of simulations, computing trends, quantum strangeness, and mathematical regularities, gather into a single soft idea. It is not absurd to take seriously the hypothesis that our universe could be an artifact of information processing, but it's also not inevitable. Many scientists insist that the only thing we can do is propose experiments and look for signatures. Others say the hypothesis is unfalsifiable and therefore not a scientific statement at all. Think of an antique music box tucked away in an attic. For years, dust gathers and the springs pause. One day, someone winds it. Tiny gears whir, a cylinder turns and a lullaby spills out. Simple, inevitable, and beautiful. The music box doesn't change the melody depending on whether you listen, but the act of winding brings the song into audible existence. If the universe were a music box, the question is whether the winding is an event outside time, or whether the song has always been playing and our ears only hear it locally. Hold that image as you drift. The possibility is inviting, but it is only a possibility, a way for us to give shape to our curiosity. On its face, the simulation question is metaphysical, but it also nudges practical questions about the future. What responsibilities would creators of simulations have? What ethical frameworks would apply to conscious entities inside simulations? If our future technology allows running simulated minds, what should we choose to do? These are not abstract concerns. They tie into how we think about AI, research ethics, and the very meaning we assign to life. Tonight, over many chapters, we will return to each of these threads. We will explore the physics and the philosophy, the mathematical curiosities and the cultural echoes, and we will do so with patience. I'll introduce simple, credible experiments scientists have proposed, and in later chapters we'll look at what it would mean if clues emerged, and how to keep living kindly and meaningfully either way. For now, let your mind rest on the images. Windows of light, a slowly turning cylinder, patterns that repeat like breaths. We are beginning a long, gentle investigation, not to force answers, but to sit with the questions and the wonder they bring. Chapter 2: Clues that our universe might be a simulation. We move forward slowly, like a camera panning across a quiet landscape, leaving the soft images of Chapter 1 behind and turning our attention to a new set of questions. If the simulation idea is more than a metaphor, what would that look like in practice? What kinds of signs might point toward an engineered reality? And how have scientists and philosophers tried, gently, carefully, to convert speculation into testable thought? This chapter is a calm tour through the sorts of evidence people bring up, the experiments imagined, and the careful objections that keep the conversation tethered to reason. Begin by closing your eyes for a breath. Imagine a still lake at night. Toss a pebble and watch the rings ripple outward. Each ring is a possible clue, subtle, widening and faint. Tonight we'll consider those rings, the little hints people point to, and the ways careful thinkers say we should treat them. One kind of hint is the appearance of glitches or anomalies, moments where memory, observation or measurement seem to misalign. Popular culture collects these into a list: collective false memories, odd coincidences, and events that feel like a momentary hiccup in the world's film. People point to the Mandela Effect, déjà vu, and stories where many witnesses remember something differently than the historical record. From a simulation perspective, such events are read as the faint trace of a correction or a patch. It's a poetic image, a software update that nips a small inconsistency, leaving some observers with a memory that no longer matches the present. The idea comforts some and unnerves others, but a gentle reminder is needed. Human memory is famously fallible. Our minds smooth rough edges, fill gaps, and prioritize meaning over precise detail. Cognitive scientists have shown again and again that memory is reconstructive. What feels like a glitch may be the normal and beautiful looseness of human recollection. Still, the persistence and vividness of certain shared false memories make the phenomenon worth a quiet look, not as proof, but as an invitation to examine how we know what we know. A second, deeper set of hints comes from the strange heart of quantum experiments. Certain experiments show behavior that resists classical intuition. Particles seem to behave differently when observed, and entangled particles show correlations over distance that baffle simple cause and effect stories. The double-slit experiment and Wheeler's delayed choice thought experiments expose how measurement and observation are entwined with outcomes in ways that make even seasoned physicists pause. From a simulation-minded vantage, these behaviors can be read as rendering effects. If the universe behaves like a system optimizing resources, it might only resolve detailed states when observers interact with them. much like a game engine that only renders what a player is looking at. This analogy makes the quantum strangeness feel less like mystical surprise and more like an engineered efficiency. But it's crucial to keep a calm, rational balance. Physics has its own internal explanations, wave functions, decoherence, and the mathematics of quantum mechanics. And many physicists treat the simulation analogy as a heuristic, not an explanation. The analogy helps intuition, but is not itself a substitute for mathematical understanding. A third hint is the way the cosmos appears finely tuned for life. The universe's physical constants, the strengths of forces, the masses of fundamental particles, the rate of cosmic expansion, fall into a narrow band that permits chemistry, stars, and planets. Some people read this as evidence of design. If the constants were different, life as we know it could not arise. There are scientific responses to this observation. One is the anthropic framing. We observe these constants because only in such a universe could observers exist to notice them. Another is the multiverse idea. Perhaps many universes with varying constants exist, and we inhabit one of the handful that allow complexity. From the simulation perspective, though, fine-tuning can be reframed as parameter choices in a program, sensible defaults that make the simulation interesting. Again, the move from this could be simulated to this must be simulated is large. We will keep our voices steady and our curiosity open. A quieter, more technical thread considers whether the universe has a finite, discrete substrate like pixels on a screen. If space and time are continuous, then in principle there is an uncountable infinity of positions and moments. But if the universe has a smallest meaningful unit, a pixel of space or a tick of time, that discreteness could hint at a computational underlying structure. Physics already uses small scales like the Planck length and Planck time as natural units, where current theories become suspect. Some researchers have suggested looking for signs of a lattice-like structure at very high energies, patterns in cosmic rays or subtle anisotropies in space. If the universe were discretized on a large grid, the most energetic particles might reveal the grid's imprint in their behavior, just as sunlight can reveal the weave of a screen. These ideas are technical and speculative, and physicists remain cautious. The search for discreteness is part of the normal scientific process. Propose measurements, check data, and assess whether the signals stand above noise. Another soft but important thread is information theory. Modern physics increasingly recognizes information as central. Black hole thermodynamics ties information to area, and ideas like the holographic principle suggest that a volume's informational content can be described on its boundary. If the universe's deep description is informational, it becomes natural to ask whether that information is being processed. Some thinkers have noted mathematical structures and physical equations that resemble the patterns used in error correction and computation. The resemblance is not proof. Mathematics is a versatile language, and similar forms can appear for many reasons. But the overlap invites careful, modest curiosity rather than grand claims. A calming thought experiment helps make these abstractions gentle. Picture a candle flame, complex, alive with currents and tiny eddies, yet governed by rules of fluid dynamics and chemistry. Now imagine creating a computer model of that flame. At first, the simulation will be crude, capturing only the broad strokes. Over time, as you refine the model and add more computational power, the simulated flame will flicker and breathe more like the real thing. What you notice in this process is that simulating detail is expensive. You only add detail where it matters. Some proponents of simulation arguments ask, what if the universe scales detail in a similar way? If so, the places where we see strange quantum behavior might be precisely where the simulation economizes on resources. Skeptical counterpoints follow, and we will treat them with respect. One major concern is unfalsifiability. If every observation can be read as consistent with simulation, then the hypothesis risks being non-scientific. Science advances by proposing hypotheses that could, in principle, be contradicted by data. Many philosophers argue that unless simulation claims lead to clear, falsifiable predictions, the idea remains metaphysical rather than scientific. We'll return to proposed tests later in the series. For now, the sober point is this: hypotheses need constraints to become useful. Another careful objection is Occam's razor, the guideline that among competing explanations the simplest that fits the data is preferable. Some say that positing a vast unknown simulator is a heavy metaphysical cost when the standard physical models already explain observations well. Yet others respond that sometimes the simplest description is itself information theoretic. A short program that generates the universe's behavior could be simpler in a formal sense than restating a long list of brute facts. The comfort of Occam's razor depends on how we count simplicity, and that itself is a subtle question. There are also ethical and existential reflections that arise from this inquiry. If our world were found to be simulated, would our moral responsibilities change? Many thinkers say no. Whether or not there is a creator outside our space-time, the relationships, suffering and joys we experience are real to us. Our commitments to one another retain their force. In practical terms, even the idea of simulation can become a mirror to study our values. How would we treat conscious beings if we could create them? The question folds back into science policy and AI ethics today, where debates about creating simulated minds are increasingly urgent. To keep your attention and reward your curiosity, let me promise you a sequence of gentle revelations coming in later chapters. Specific experiments physicists and philosophers have proposed to look for simulation-like signatures, historical and cultural precedents that illuminate why this idea recurs in human thought, careful mathematical ideas about information capacity and limits, and finally, what the discovery of simulation-like evidence, if it ever occurred, would mean for our everyday choices. Each chapter will be a slow, considered step, and your presence here will help shape the tone. If you find a particular story compelling, share it in the comments. If a question lingers, tuck it into your mind and we will return to it. Before we close this chapter, let us walk one last time through a simple, instructive scenario. Not to prove anything, but to practice thinking clearly. Imagine scientists detect a tiny anisotropy in the highest energy cosmic rays, a pattern that repeats like the weave of a cloth. The announcement would be careful, tentative, and the data subject to many tests. The scientific community would propose alternate explanations: unknown astrophysical sources, detector artifacts, statistical flukes. Only after extensive cross-checks would any claim gain traction. If the pattern persisted, we might say we found a hint, a pebble that made ripples in the lake. Even then, the interpretation would be debated. This imagined carefulness is exactly what good science looks like: patient, slow, and humble. So let your breathing slow as we end this chapter. Think of the universe as a place where questions are allowed to be both wondrous and disciplined. We are practicing the art of gentle inquiry, a practice that blends imagination with the rigors of evidence. In the upcoming chapters, we will look in greater detail at the specific experiments and proposals scientists have developed, and we will listen to the skeptical voices that keep the discourse healthy. Chapter 3: Testing, Reality, Experiments and Clues of a Simulated Universe. We move gently into another quiet step along our journey, guided by one of the most comforting habits of science: testing ideas through careful experiments. Tonight, we will walk slowly through the ways scientists and thinkers have imagined checking for signs that our universe might be constructed or simulated. Breathe in deeply, let the questions arrive softly, and let them settle around you like snowflakes landing on a calm winter evening. Some of the earliest proposals begin by asking simple, elegant questions. If the universe were a simulation, could there be observable limits or patterns? The faint fingerprints of computation? One place to start is at the very smallest or largest scales of reality. Imagine that space and time are not smooth and continuous, but made of tiny building blocks, like pixels on a screen. At everyday scales, this pixelation is invisible, but at the extremes it might leave subtle traces. For example, physicists have proposed looking at the highest energy cosmic rays, particles that travel from distant parts of the universe at incredible speeds. If space were discretized, these particles might reveal a hidden lattice, much like sunlight can reveal the weave of a fine screen. Scientists use data from cosmic ray observatories to place limits on how fine such a lattice could be. They do not declare discovery. Instead, they take careful, small steps, measuring and narrowing possibilities, one patient calculation at a time. Another thread takes us into the strange and fascinating world of quantum mechanics. Here, particles behave in ways that defy everyday intuition. The double-slit experiment shows that tiny particles, like electrons, act like waves until they are observed, at which point they collapse into definite states. Wheeler's delayed choice experiment extends this mystery. The act of observation can seem to reach backward in time, deciding the particle's behavior after it has already travelled. Simulation theorists suggest that this could be similar to how a computer only renders what a player sees in a video game, economizing resources. But, in the calm language of physics, quantum theory already predicts these effects with precision, and proposed experiments would need to reveal tiny deviations that persist even after accounting for all known causes. A third avenue is the search for holographic noise. Some physicists propose that the universe's information content might scale with area rather than volume, as in the holographic principle. If this is true, extremely sensitive instruments could detect tiny jitters, subtle, coordinated wandering of positions in space, like a barely perceptible vibration in a finely tuned violin string. The holometer at Fermilab attempted just this, an interferometer designed to see if space-time itself carries a tiny, discrete graininess. The results did not reveal a signature, but that is valuable too. Null results help refine models, focus future experiments, and sharpen the questions we ask of reality. Beyond physical instruments, researchers explore statistical and information theoretic approaches. Could the universe's laws be compressible, like a short computer program that generates rich patterns? If a simple set of rules produces everything we observe, some argue, this would make the simulation idea more economical in principle. Translating this into experiments is subtle and abstract, requiring careful definitions of what counts as compressibility and reproducibility. These ideas invite curiosity, not certainty, encouraging a calm exploration of what evidence might look like. Other proposals focus on patterns in precision measurements, tiny discrepancies in fundamental constants or particle properties might in theory indicate computation-like artifacts, but any such observation must pass many rigorous tests, independent replication, careful calibration, and elimination of mundane explanations. History reminds us that anomalies often fade under scrutiny, leaving only the clean slate of verified knowledge. We can also estimate the resources a simulator might need. A perfect, particle-by-particle simulation of the universe would demand unimaginable energy. perhaps the output of entire stars or even hypothetical Dyson spheres. Yet, the simulator could save effort by rendering only what is observed like a video game. These calculations are not about claiming certainty, but about mapping possibilities, helping scientists understand what could or could not be feasible. History offers gentle lessons about interpreting experiments. Science has confronted oddities before, apparent miracles, strange coincidences, or measurements that seemed impossible. Patience, replication, and careful scrutiny have always guided progress. If a team reported evidence of computational artifacts, the community would respond with cautious excitement, intrigued, yet insisting on repeated, verified, and independently checked data. Only through this slow, collaborative process can confidence grow. Even if a pattern consistent with a simulation appeared, alternative explanations would remain. Cosmic ray lattices could be due to unknown astrophysics, environmental interference, or instrument quirks. Interferometer noise could be software or local vibrations. Scientists design experiments not just to collect data, but to compare multiple hypotheses and converge on the most coherent explanation. Evidence grows meaningful only when independent lines point to the same conclusion. Importantly, these proposed tests are already useful, even without finding a smoking gun. Trying to convert a metaphysical idea into an empirical question forces clarity, precision, and rigor. It makes scientists define their terms, make assumptions explicit, and consider what can actually be measured. For example, the cosmic ray lattice studies produced concrete testable bounds, not proof, but guidance. The holometer's null result refined theoretical models and focused future inquiry. Each step, each patient measurement, strengthens our understanding. Finally, let us consider the human dimension. Experiments require time, patience, collaboration, and humility. Enthusiasm for simulation theory can be a gift, funding imaginative experiments and cross-disciplinary work between physicists, computer scientists, and philosophers. Yet it must be balanced by careful skepticism. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. This balance, curiosity and caution, is the hallmark of good science. As you settle into this chapter's slow rhythm, imagine quiet laboratories, instruments humming softly, researchers checking streams of data in the night, and scholarly discussions unfolding in journals. Each null result refines our view. Each anomaly invites gentle scrutiny. The journey is incremental, like tracing faint patterns in the sand. Hypothesis, measurement, replication, interpretation. When you are ready, breathe deeply. Picture scientists carefully tracing lines in noisy data, patient as archaeologists dusting for fragments of pottery. If evidence for a simulated universe emerges, it will come gradually, through slow, communal effort. If it never does, the process will have still taught us much about our cosmos and how to ask better, more disciplined questions. Chapter 4: Consciousness, Ethics, and Meaning in a Simulated Cosmos. We continue on the soft path we have been tracing, carrying forward the quiet curiosity from our last chapter. Now we pause to consider perhaps the most intimate set of questions the simulation idea raises. What is consciousness in such a picture? What ethical responsibilities would arise if conscious beings could be created inside a program? And how would the meaning we attach to life change, if at all, when we imagine reality as engineered? Breathe slowly and let these questions settle like warm light. We will move slowly through ideas from neuroscience and philosophy, then gently into questions of care, responsibility, and everyday meaning. Begin by imagining a single, perfect bead of water held on a leaf. The bead is small, simple in structure, but it reflects the sky and the surrounding leaves. Consciousness is sometimes like that bead, a single phenomenon reflecting many conditions. Scientists and philosophers have long tried to explain how subjective experience, the vivid quality of what it is like to see blue or taste salt, arises from matter. Several theories try to bridge the subjective and the physical. Some hold that consciousness is a pattern of information processing. Certain organizational structures in a physical system give rise to experience. Others emphasize biological or physical substrate, that the brain's wet chemistry and specific neural architecture are essential. Still others treat consciousness as fundamental, a basic aspect of reality woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Each view suggests different answers to the question, could a simulated process be genuinely conscious? If consciousness is essentially computational, that is, if what matters is functional organization and information processing rather than the physical materials doing the processing, then simulated minds running on sufficiently complex hardware could, in principle, have experiences as genuine as ours. This is the intuition behind many discussions about mind uploading and digital beings. The idea is not trivial. It requires that simulation reproduce not only input-output patterns, but also the internal dynamics that produce a subjective point of view. The debate about whether this is possible is active and nuanced. Thoughtful researchers stress that we must be precise about what counts as the right kind of organization, and attentive to the fact that our current computational models are still primitive compared with the brain's adaptive, biochemical, and massively parallel processes. If, instead, consciousness depends on specific physical processes, the particular chemistry of neurons, their electrochemical gradients, or phenomena we have not yet discovered, then a simulation might mimic behavior convincingly, without producing first-person experience. In that case, a simulated being could act as if it were conscious, report experiences, and respond to stimuli, yet there would be a lingering question about whether an inner life actually exists. This distinction between being functionally indistinguishable and possessing genuine subjective experience is one reason philosophers press for clarity before making ethical decisions. Either way, the moral stakes remain profound. Suppose for a moment that simulated minds could have experiences morally analogous to human experiences. What ethical responsibilities would creators have? Imagine an artisan crafting a garden that blooms only when the gardener looks at it. If the flowers feel the sun or the cold, we would ask whether it is right to create storms in that garden. Ethics, in this context, branches into several familiar but weighty questions. First, there is the harm principle. If simulated beings can suffer, then causing unnecessary suffering, even for curiosity or entertainment, raises moral alarms. Many ethicists argue that the capacity for suffering, not the substrate that bears it, should ground moral concern. Thus, a responsible civilization might avoid creating simulations that entail suffering, or put in place strict safeguards, consent-like protocols, or mechanisms ensuring flourishing. Second, there is the question of consent and autonomy. If a creator can make a world and then manipulate its inhabitants' circumstances arbitrarily, does that violate a principle akin to treating persons as ends rather than means? Even in our ordinary lives, we intervene in others' autonomy with moral constraints. Creating entire realms where autonomy can be overridden at will would invite intense ethical scrutiny and legal thought. Imagine running a simulation to study human behavior where the simulated people have no say. The potential for abuse is staggering. Ethical design principles would need to be developed and institutionalized well before such technology matured. Third, there is the problem of responsibility toward created minds after their creation. If a simulated community is started and then abandoned, what duties fall on the creator? Do the creators have obligations to ensure ongoing welfare, to provide resources, or to prevent catastrophic collapse? Such questions feel new, but they parallel existing debates about responsibility for creations in the real world. Pet ownership, ecosystem management, and social policy are all smaller-scale analogies that show how we already practice obligations toward beings dependent on us. Fourth, there is the question of rights and recognition. If simulated beings are conscious, do they deserve rights? Legal, moral, or social? How would we recognize them and adjudicate their claims? These questions are not merely speculative. As artificial intelligence advances, we are beginning to face small versions of these problems: how to treat increasingly complex agents, what protections or limits to place on automated systems, and how to design institutions that respect dignity. Beyond the procedural ethics, the simulation idea presses on personal meaning. Some people worry that if life were merely a simulation, values would be undermined, that relationships or achievements would lose weight. But this reaction rests on an implicit metaphysical assumption. That meaning depends on an absolute foundation in base reality. Another view, equally reasonable and gentle, is that meaning is locally grounded in the patterns of human life. Relationships, commitments, joys, and responsibilities derive their force from the way we experience and enact them, not from whether the fabric of reality sits on a base layer or a simulation. A loving act is still loving, whether the actor stands in a wooden house or in a silicon-rendered cathedral. The ethical texture of our lives, care, art, suffering, courage, retains its felt reality. This does not minimize metaphysical curiosity. It simply anchors our moral life in the pragmatic, lived world. There are also important psychological effects to anticipate. The simulation hypothesis can be calming for some, a way to frame grief or loss as part of a larger design, or a comforting narrative that we are observed by something beyond. For others, the idea may be unsettling, provoking existential anxiety. Good communicators and thinkers recommend responding with balance, allow wonder and curiosity to flourish, but keep daily life engaged with human-scale responsibilities. The practices that help in either case are familiar: tending relationships, cultivating gratitude, engaging in meaningful work, and finding solace in community. Practical ethics converge with policy in another domain: the regulation of simulation technology itself. If advanced civilizations might one day create simulated minds, societies would need laws and norms to guide what is permissible. These might include prohibitions on creating conscious simulations for trivial entertainment, requirements for welfare safeguards, and frameworks for oversight akin to institutional review boards used in human subject research today. The parallel to how we now regulate medical trials and AI research suggests a path: slow, deliberative, and cross-disciplinary governance designed to protect valuable goods and vulnerable beings. As we ease toward the chapter's close, imagine a small, warm room with soft light and 2 chairs. 2 friends sit and share stories. Outside, rain taps a gentle rhythm on the window. Whether the room exists in base reality or within a program, the conversation matters to the friends because it shapes their lives. This is the modest moral of our exploration. The metaphysical question is vast, but it does not absolve us from the proximate obligations of care, curiosity, and compassion. In later chapters, we will return to technical models of consciousness, explore historical myths that reflect layered realities, and examine how artists, writers, and scientists have responded to the idea. For now, carry with you a simple practice. If a question makes you anxious, ask instead what you can do for the people nearest to you. If a question fills you with wonder, share that wonder gently with someone else. These small acts are the stitches that give texture to any reality. Chapter 5. Historical and cultural echoes, myths, dreams, and layers of reality. We move now into a gentler, older current of the same river we've been following, the human stories that have long asked whether the world we wake in is the most real thing there is. Tonight we will trace how cultures across the globe have used metaphors of dreaming, illusion, and layered worlds to make sense of life. We will walk slowly through myths, parables, and practices that mirror modern simulation ideas, and we will listen for what these echoes tell us about the hopes and fears people have when they imagine reality as something constructed. Settle in. Let your breathing slow. Imagine the crackle of a small hearth and a circle of listeners leaning in to hear an old tale. That is the tone we'll carry. Begin with a short story to soften the intellect and open the heart. There is an ancient parable from China about a man named Zhuangzi who dreamed he was a butterfly dancing through flowers. He woke and felt the lingering sweetness of the dream and asked himself, was he Zhuangzi who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he was Zhuangzi? The parable is not a puzzle to be solved, but a gentle brush against the boundary between waking and dreaming, an invitation to suspend certainty and feel the mystery. That tiny image, butterfly dream, the unsure line between states of being, is the kind of human response that reappears in cultures everywhere when people confront the fragile grain of reality. Plato's cave is another familiar echo. Imagine people chained in a cavern, watching shifting shadows on a wall and mistaking those shadows for the whole of existence. If one prisoner escapes and sees the sun, he returns with a story so strange it sounds like madness. Plato did not simply describe an intellectual mistake. He described the process of awakening, of learning that the comfortable sense of reality can be limited and shaped by perspective. This allegory has been used for centuries to teach about knowledge, education, and the moral duty to seek truth. It also reads very naturally beside modern metaphors of rendering and simulation. The prisoner's shadows are like low-resolution textures projected by a distant engine. The image comforts and unsettles at once. Hindu and Buddhist traditions add layers of depth with their own ancient language. The Sanskrit word Maya in Hindu thought describes the world's illusory aspect. Not that the world is unreal in the sense of meaningless, but that it is a surface of phenomena that can distract from deeper truths. Buddhist teachings use dream metaphors and the practice of dream yoga to train the mind to recognize the way experiences are constructed and conditioned. These traditions do not aim simply to deny life's richness. Instead, they offer practices to see clearly and act with compassion within the world, whether it is ultimate or conventionally real. In these ancient teachings, the point is ethical and practical. Perception shapes suffering and freedom, and understanding the constructed nature of experience can lead to gentler living. Many indigenous cultures carry rich cosmologies that describe layered worlds, spirit realms, or overlapping realities. Stories of shamans travelling between realms, the underworld, the sky world, and the everyday plane, reflect a lived recognition that existence can feel multidimensional. These practices were not primitive conjecture, but integrated systems of meaning, ritual, and social governance. They helped communities make sense of illness, death, and weather, and they embedded norms about reciprocity and care. To read these myths alongside modern simulation ideas is to notice a common human habit. When faced with mystery, we invent layered stories that help us navigate uncertainty and honour the things we cannot control. In the medieval West, thinkers and theologians also wrestled with layered realities. Mystical writers described visions and states of consciousness that felt more real than the ordinary world. Philosophers asked about the nature of God and the created order, and debates about appearance versus reality threaded through moral and metaphysical thought. Even when the language is different, the core human concern is the same. What we take for granted as real may be only one face of a more complex structure. Modern literature and art have continually returned to layered reality as a theme. From dreamlike novels to speculative films, creators use the motif to ask ethical and existential questions. Science fiction, in particular, has been a powerful cultural laboratory for testing the social consequences of layered realities. Writers imagine civilizations that create virtual worlds for refuge, for control, or for exploration, and these fictions serve as ethical rehearsals. What would we do if we could make worlds? How would we treat the beings inside? What would we risk, and what would we preserve? These stories do more than entertain. They train our moral imagination for possible futures. One of the elegant features of myths and these cultural echoes is how they frame human anxiety and wonder in workable forms. Consider the recurring pattern. A myth recognizes an uneasy gap. Why is there suffering? Why is there death? Why does my memory fail? The myth then proposes a layered story, dream, illusion, an unseen being, or an initiation rite that offers a form of control, ritual, ethics, or practice. These responses are practical because they deliver actions. You pray, you fast, you dream, you create ritual space, you care for one another. In modern terms, if the simulation idea unsettles us, turn it into practical steps, ethical safeguards, scientific checks, daily acts of kindness, is how cultures historically converted metaphysical anxiety into communal order. It's worth pausing to observe how cultures differ in the emotional valence they place on the idea of illusory reality. For some traditions, the world's apparent unreality is liberating. If life is a dream, attachment melts away, and compassion becomes the path. For others, the thought is humbling and terrifying. If some hidden power shapes all, then our autonomy seems illusory, and our moral agency threatened. These differing emotional responses reflect social structures, histories, and existential priorities. In times and places where survival is precarious, explanations that emphasize order, rituals that produce rainfall, ancestors who protect the clan, tend to have practical social functions. Where intellectual inquiry blooms, metaphorical versions of simulation provoke philosophical experimentation. There is also a fascinating interplay between ritual and what we now call simulation technology. Rituals are, in a sense, communal simulations, repeated patterns of sound, movement, and symbol that alter perception and create shared realities. A prayer service or a seasonal festival coordinates many minds into a shared narrative, stabilizing meaning and producing a felt world that matters. Modern immersive technologies aim to produce similar shared states, but through engineered sensory channels rather than embodied ritual. The parallel suggests that whether created by tradition or by code, shared realities are built, and thus subject to design choices, power dynamics, and ethical concerns. Another important cultural lesson is humility. When new explanatory frameworks arise, whether astronomy supplants geocentrism or genetics reframes heredity, people sometimes leap to metaphysical conclusions that later prove overreaching. The historical horizon shows repeated cycles. Metaphors are useful, then they ossify, then they are revised. A calm reading of cultural precedents encourages restraint. It reminds us to treat the simulation metaphor as one thread among many, valuable for its imaginative power and its capacity to sharpen questions, but not as a final mandate. To keep our attention gentle and curious, notice how different disciplines pick up these cultural echoes and translate them. Anthropologists study how beliefs about layered realities structure social life. Philosophers analyze the conceptual coherence of dream metaphors. Artists dramatize the emotional texture. Scientists look for empirical signatures. Each perspective amplifies different aspects of the same phenomenon. The anthropologist's careful field notes about how a community performs its rituals are as important a datum as the physicist's calculation about Planck scale discreteness. Both tell us something about human beings trying to live well within limits they don't fully understand. Let me share one more small tale that captures how myths orient people toward ethical choices. In a coastal village, fishermen believed that the sea hid a mirror world beneath its surface, a place that reflected human greed. Every full moon, the community gathered to cast back a thankful song, asking the sea to be generous. Over generations, this ritual evolved into a set of communal norms. They limited what each person could take, they repaired damaged nets together, and they maintained a watch against overfishing. Whether the mirror world existed was less important than the shared practice that protected the local ecology. In this example, the myth performed a social function, creating sustainable patterns of behavior. It's a small case study in how metaphysical stories and practical ethics braid together. As you breathe slowly, imagine these cultural patterns as different rooms in a large house. Each room offers a particular light, some warm and domestic, some cool and austere, some festive and loud. The simulation metaphor is another room with its own light and furniture, computational images, rendering metaphors, ethical puzzles. Walking through the rooms enriches our understanding without forcing us to live in one exclusively. Finally, a gentle prompt to keep you with us. As we continue, we will return to how these cultural echoes inform modern debates about technology, governance, and personal practice. In an upcoming chapter, we will examine computational costs and what real engineers say about the resource needs of running simulated minds. Later, we will explore how artists and storytellers use the metaphor to shape public imagination. If a particular myth I told tonight touched you, type it into the comments and tell us how it makes you feel. Your notes help guide future chapters and keep our communal exploration alive. Now allow your thoughts to settle like dusk. The House of Human Stories is large and warm, and tonight we have walked through several of its rooms. The metaphors of dream and layered worlds are not evidence by themselves, but they do reveal how people have coped with big questions and created communities that endure. Let that feeling of continuity rest in you. Across centuries and continents, people have asked who they are and what the world is made of, and they have answered with practices that shaped lives. Chapter 6. The engineering question. How big a computer would it take? We continue our slow, deliberate journey and turn now to a practical, almost tactile question. If a civilization wanted to create a universe like ours, what would they actually need? This chapter is an exploration of scale, energy, information, and clever engineering. We will move step by step, imagining not just impossible machines, but the kinds of tricks a designer might use to save resources. Picture a quiet workshop at the edge of the cosmos. Tools, careful plans, and patient hands. Breathe in gently and let the grand numbers become a kind of slow, cosmic music rather than a source of overwhelm. Start with an image. Imagine trying to build a model city in a shoebox. You could sculpt every brick and blade of grass by hand, an immense task. Or you could build a framework with a few well-crafted rules. A rule for how streets grow, a rule for how trees sprout, and textures that render as you look closer. Good engineers build systems that exploit patterns and compress information. The world we observe, whether simulated or natural, shows immense regularity. That regularity is the first clue for making simulation feasible. Systems with patterns are cheaper to describe and thus cheaper to compute. To make the engineering question concrete, think about what must be represented in a simulation. At a minimum, you need the laws that govern interactions, the physics, the initial conditions, how the system starts, and the state updates, how things change over time. If the simulation includes minds, you also need representations for sensory input, learning dynamics, memory, and decision-making. The combined cost of representing particles, fields, and conscious processes is what drives the raw compute and energy demands. One straightforward way to estimate resource needs is to imagine an extremely naive approach. Simulate every particle in the universe at full fidelity all the time. The numbers become enormous quickly. There are fantastically many atoms. Tracking each with full precision would require mind-bending storage and operation counts. But here's the gentle, crucial point. No real engineer, not in software, not in film, and not in theoretical speculation, would choose that blunt method if smarter options existed. Efficiency and cleverness are the rule. What do smart options look like? First, adaptive level of detail. This is the rendering trick used in modern graphics and simulations. Don't compute what no one observes. If a distant galaxy is a faint point of light, you only calculate its gross properties until someone peers at it closely. As an observer approaches, the simulation refines detail. Think of the night sky. From a distance, galaxies are soft smudges. Telescopes resolve their structure. A designer who wants to economize would only refine those distant regions when an observer's instruments demanded it. This kind of attention-based rendering dramatically reduces continuous load. Second, rule-based compression. Many natural phenomena can be described by simple equations and generative rules. Instead of storing each snowflake, store a rule for how ice crystals form under certain conditions. Instead of computing every molecule in a storm cloud, use higher-level fluid dynamics approximations until microscale effects become relevant. Rules compress state into compact descriptions that can be expanded on demand. From a computational perspective, compression is economic and elegant. Third, probabilistic sampling. Not every microstate needs to be tracked deterministically. For many macroscopic outcomes, sampling from statistically representative distributions suffices. Meteorologists do this today. They don't compute the path of every air molecule. They use fluid equations and statistical ensembles. A simulation designer might combine deterministic cause, for things that matter precisely, with probabilistic layers, for background detail, balancing fidelity with cost. Fourth, reuse and symmetry. If the simulation contains many similar regions, repeating patterns in biology or chemistry, a smart system can reuse models and templates rather than recomputing each instance from scratch. Think of a population of trees. Rather than simulating each branch from first principles, the simulator could apply a generative model with variable parameters. This is how modern rendering engines make forests look rich without planting billions of unique polygons by hand. Fifth, distributed resource harvesting. A civilization that aims to run massive simulations will likely need vast energy. Ideas commonly invoked in speculative engineering include megastructures like Dyson-like harvesters to capture stellar output, or tapping rotational or gravitational energy from compact objects. There are also creative possibilities, using quantum scale efficiencies, routing waste heat into computation, or designing reversible computation to reduce thermodynamic costs. The precise engineering details are the domain of theoretical speculation, but the pattern is clear. Massive computation demands equally massive energy engineering. There is also an instructive thermodynamic constraint to keep in mind. Computation is not free. Physical systems obey laws that relate energy, entropy, and information. At a fundamental level, changing information stored in physical systems can have energy costs. This ties computational limits to physical processes, and it means that any emulation of minds or physics needs to reckon with energy budgets and heat flows. A calm takeaway. The prospect of simulating a universe is not merely a question of raw processing, but of how that processing interacts with the physical world of the simulator. Let us imagine a middle path between naive impossibility and omnipotent feasibility. Consider a civilization that can build large-scale computation nodes and prioritizes efficiency. They run many medium-fidelity simulations for research and entertainment. They selectively run a few high-fidelity ancestor simulations for curiosity or cultural reasons. They employ rendering on demand, rule-based compression, and distributed energy infrastructure, and they let most of the universe remain in low resolution until observed. From our inside view, that system could feel indistinguishable from a continuously rendered cosmos, because the simulation only refines detail where and when needed. The engineering seems demanding, but not logically impossible. Another practical idea is hierarchical simulation. Instead of simulating every level equally, the simulator focuses fidelity where conscious observers are present. The cosmic background remains coarse-grained. Planetary environments where minds emerge get more resources. Biological nervous systems get finer-grained modelling. This hierarchy reduces the overall cost because conscious experience, arguably the most computation-intensive aspect, occurs in a tiny fraction of the simulated volume. It's also important to repay humility. Many conservative scientists remain skeptical because even with all these optimizations, the resource demands might still be prohibitive, or because we lack reason to assume such simulation projects will be carried out ethically by future civilizations. The unknowns are numerous. What motivates future engineers? Do they care about ancestor simulations? Will they have different value systems that make our intuitions irrelevant? These sociological unknowns are part of the engineering picture. Technology does not advance in a vacuum. Before we close this chapter, let us anchor these technical reflections with a small human story. Picture an artist constructing a miniature town inside a gallery. She does not sculpt each window pane by hand. Instead, she paints facades that only reveal interior scenes when visitors step close. She programs tiny lights to come on when people pass. The town feels alive to visitors because the design concentrates detail where it matters. The artist's craft mirrors the methods we discussed: economy, artistry, and sensitivity to the observer. Whether the artist is a sculptor or a hypothetical cosmic engineer, the principle holds. Constrained resources push creators toward thoughtful, localized fidelity. In upcoming chapters, we will examine what engineers and computer scientists actually say about simulation, how current computational trends translate into long-term projections, and how the interplay of hardware, software, and energy shapes what might be possible. We will also pause to consider whether the patterns we see, like mathematical regularity and error-correcting structures, are truly suggestive of engineered information, or simply the natural fruit of physical law. For now, rest in the image of the quiet workshop at the universe's edge. Tools glint under soft light, plans lie unrolled on a table. The work is immense, but the method is elegant. Define rules, compress where you can, refine where needed. That is the engineer's way, and it gives us a calm, plausible framework to imagine how a simulated universe could be built without invoking miracles. Chapter 7: Probability, Philosophy, and the Odds. We continue with a careful, unhurried step into a domain where numbers and judgment meet imagination. How to think about the probability that we live in a simulation. This chapter will slowly unpack the philosophical reasoning people use when they try to turn the simulation idea into a quantitative claim. We will explain the basic logic, explore important complications, and gently illuminate why sharp-sounding odds often hide assumptions that deserve careful scrutiny. Breathe in, breathe out, and let the arithmetic of ideas settle like warm stones. Begin with the central, quiet intuition many people reach for. If a future civilization could run many realistic simulations, then the number of simulated minds might vastly outnumber the number of original minds. If that's true, then a randomly chosen conscious observer is overwhelmingly likely to be in a simulation simply because most observers would live in those many simulated runs. The argument has a simple, almost mathematical sheen. More simulated observers, higher chance any particular observer is simulated. The simplicity of that move is compelling, and it's why thinkers like Nick Bostrom framed the idea as a trilemma rather than a settled conclusion. But the simplicity hides many choices. To make this intuition rigorous, we need to ask precise questions. What do we count as an observer? Which possible observers belong to our reference class, the set from which we imagine ourselves randomly sampled? How many simulations might be run, and with what distribution of fidelity? What are the prior probabilities we assign to the technological and moral futures of civilizations? Each of these choices shifts the numerical picture substantially. One helpful way to proceed is to introduce the idea of priors and updating gently. Suppose you start with a prior, a tentative background belief about how likely it is that civilizations will ever develop technologies to create realistic, conscious simulations. That prior can be low, high, or anywhere in between, depending on how optimistic you are about engineering, how skeptical you are about mind uploading, or how concerned you are about existential risks that might prevent such futures. If your prior says it's extremely unlikely that civilizations ever run such simulations, then even if the arithmetic of many simulated minds is powerful, you might still end up thinking it's improbable we're simulated. Conversely, if your prior says simulations are likely and popular, the balance tips the other way. The lesson is modest but important. The final probability depends as much on background assumptions as on a single striking calculation. Next, we meet the reference class problem. Imagine you're told, pick a random person from the set of all humans who have ever lived. Which statistics would be relevant? If you then widen the set to include all human-like minds that could ever exist, across future simulations and alternate histories, the statistics change. Philosophers call this sensitivity to the reference class a serious challenge. Different, plausible choices of the reference class yield different probability estimates. This is not a minor technicality. It's a structural ambiguity that makes assigning a single, objective number very difficult. Two competing kinds of self-sampling principles are often discussed in this context. One says you should reason as if you are randomly sampled from the set of all actually existing observers, the self-sampling assumption. Another variant, the self-indication assumption, modifies the reasoning to take into account that your very existence is evidence that many observers exist. These different prescriptions lead to different updates, and sometimes to counterintuitive conclusions. The general point is gentle but clear. There is no single, universally agreed method for turning existential considerations into numerical probabilities. Another subtle factor is the motive and behaviour of future civilizations. Even if the tools to simulate minds exist, would they be used widely? Some imagine futures are teeming with their ancestor simulations run for research, nostalgia, or entertainment. Other plausible futures involve strict ethical norms that forbid creating conscious beings for trivial purposes. The frequency and purpose of simulation matter enormously. A civilization that forbids painful or ethically ambiguous simulations will generate far fewer simulated suffering minds than one that treats simulations casually. Thus, a large part of the probability calculation is really a question of cultural values projected into the deep future, an uncertain and human judgment. There are also technical objections rooted in the possibility that simulated minds might be rare even if the tools exist. If consciousness requires particular physical substrates or specific processes we cannot yet duplicate in silicon-like media, then many proposed simulations might produce superficially convincing behavior without producing genuine subjective experience. In that case, the count of simulated minds, the number that matters for the probability argument, could be much lower than naive arithmetic suggests. This reply insists on a careful distinction between appearance and phenomenal consciousness. Many simulated agents might be behaviorally rich, but not have inner lives, and that distinction changes the probability calculus dramatically. Let us slow down and consider a simple analogy to make these abstract issues easier to hold. Imagine a large library with two kinds of books: true historical diaries and fictional novels written in the style of diaries. If you walk into the library and pick a diary at random, what is the chance it's a real diary? The answer depends on the relative number of real diaries to fictions and on how similar the fictions are to real diaries. If the library is full of realistic forgeries, the chance your randomly chosen diary is genuine is low. But to determine the ratio you need to know how many forgeries were made and why. That concrete framing mirrors the simulation question: are there many simulated, forged observers relative to genuine historical ones, and why? An important cousin of these probabilistic reflections is the doomsday-style reasoning, which asks, given our place in a sequence, say the order of human births or technological milestones, what can we infer about the likely length of the sequence? Some probabilistic arguments use our ordinal position as data to update expectations about future population or longevity. The same style of reasoning can be directed at simulations. Where are we in the sequence of possible observer moments? These moves are subtle and controversial. They invite careful skepticism because they depend on how we choose to index observers and whether such indices are meaningful. Because of these many moving pieces, priors, reference classes, motives of future agents, the nature of consciousness, clear, universally convincing numeric answers are elusive. That explains why smart, well-informed people can disagree sharply about the odds. Some find the argument powerful and conclude simulation is likely. Others find it unconvincing and preserve their belief in base reality. Both responses can be rational once you inspect the underlying assumptions. There is a soothing epistemic practice to adopt here. Hold the probability estimate lightly. Treat such estimates as provisional and conditional on explicit assumptions. If someone asserts a crisp percentage, ask gently, which prior did you use? What reference class? What assumptions about future behaviour? Those follow-up questions are not pedantry. They are the normal and healthy work of clarifying what a probabilistic claim means. Now consider the psychological dimension of assigning probabilities to cosmic scale claims. Some people find comfort in neat numbers because they translate existential worry into digestible risk. Others find that probabilistic framing increases anxiety, making uncertainty feel transactional. A calm, grounded approach is to use probability talk as a tool for intellectual clarity, not as an existential anchor. Probabilistic reasoning helps prioritize where to focus attention. For instance, whether to invest in AI safety or existential risk mitigation, but it should not become the only language we use to live well. Finally, there are methodological promises and limits. The probabilistic framing nudges us toward empirical and decision-theoretic questions that do have bite. For instance, one can ask, if the simulation hypothesis were true, what practical differences would we expect in observable data? What would change in scientific practice? How would policy adapt? Translating metaphysical uncertainty into decision-relevant questions is a productive step. It allows us to take seriously the philosophical possibility without being paralyzed by it. As you let these ideas settle, imagine a scale with many balancing stones, each stone labelled with an assumption, technological feasibility, ethical choices, nature of consciousness, reference class, and priors. Move one stone slightly, and the balance shifts. The exercise is not meant to produce certainty, but to clarify the knobs we can turn intellectually. Our best posture is humble curiosity. Make assumptions explicit. Update when evidence demands it, and keep living with care and attention. In forthcoming chapters, we will explore several of these knobs more deeply. We will examine concrete estimates of computational resources and how engineers reason about scaling. We will return to the ethics of future civilizations and how their values might shape the prevalence of simulations. And we will look at specific empirical proposals that aim to place bounds on the claim. Each step will be slow and focused, with a steady voice and clear assumptions. For now, breathe slowly and let the arithmetic of ideas soften into a calm vigilance. Probabilities help us think clearly, but they rarely deliver absolute truths. When uncertain, choose compassion, curiosity, and community as the guides that matter most. Chapter 8: Artificial Intelligence, the Tools That Could Build Worlds. We move now into a gentle, careful examination of a practical and timely question. What role might artificial intelligence play in creating simulated realities, or in making those simulations plausible? And what are the technical and ethical contours of that possibility? Breathe in and let your attention settle. This chapter will be a slow walk through how modern AI works at a conceptual level, why it matters for the simulation conversation, what kinds of hardware and architectural choices change the picture, and how humans might shape the choices that determine whether simulated minds ever come into being. I'll keep the language plain and the pace unhurried, like a teacher showing the gears of a clock one cog at a time. Start with a simple picture of how many AIs used today are built. Imagine a workshop where builders assemble machines out of many small cooperating parts. In current practice, artificial intelligence is usually a collection of algorithms that learn patterns from data. Engineers feed examples to models, and those models discover statistical regularities, how words follow one another, what a cat looks like in an image, or how to predict the next frame in a video. The simplest intuition is that intelligence, or at least useful intelligent behavior, can arise from systems that ingest a lot of information and adjust internal parameters to reduce error. The technical details can be deep, but the plain idea is straightforward. Learn patterns, make predictions, act on those predictions. Why does this matter for simulation? Because simulations require systems that can generate complex, believable behavior at scale. Modern AI already helps generate rich content, images, text, audio, and even entire virtual scenes. These capabilities compress the cost of creating lifelike details. Where a human previously handcrafted every texture and rule, an AI-based generator can produce plausible environments and agents with far less manual effort. This is an engineer's dream, automated world building that amplifies human creativity and reduces production costs. Now let us move from content generation to modelling minds. There are two distinct tasks here. One is to build systems that behave like humans, chat convincingly, play roles, or make complex decisions. The other, deeper task is to model systems that have conscious experience. Many present-day AIs are impressive at the first task. They can mimic conversation, solve narrow problems, and adapt to new inputs. But that behavioural competence does not, by itself, tell us whether any inner life is present. The distinction matters because if the goal is to create ethical, conscious beings inside simulations, mimicking behaviour is necessary but may not be sufficient. Consider architectural choices. Today's powerful models tend to be large, highly parallel neural networks trained on huge datasets. They excel at pattern recognition and generation because they learn representations across layers of abstraction. Future advances may follow similar scaling paths. Bigger models, more data, more compute. Or they may take different routes. Specialized neuromorphic chips that emulate neural spikes, hybrid systems combining symbolic reasoning with learned perception, or quantum-enhanced architectures that change what is tractable to compute. Each path changes the resource picture and the kinds of behaviors that are easy to produce. A future civilization might find one route, especially convenient for simulating minds, and that convenience would affect how many simulations they might run. Energy and hardware are the quiet, physical constraints beneath AI's apparent magic. Training and running large models consumes energy and requires physical infrastructure, data centers, cooling systems, and specialized processors. Those material needs are part of why the question of whether simulations are feasible is not purely abstract. It's grounded in engineering realities. If future hardware becomes fantastically more energy and space efficient, the scale of possible simulations grows. If hardware plateaus because of fundamental physical or economic limits, the scale is constrained. Either outcome is plausible. Our role here is to notice the dependency and treat it with calm curiosity rather than alarm. There are also clever software tricks that reduce costs. Distillation, pruning, and adaptive compute all make models smaller or more efficient for specific tasks. In simulation terms, these tricks are the rendering on demand and level of detail strategies we already discussed. An AI could provide the behavioral polish only where observers focus, significantly reducing average computational load. This is not futuristic speculation alone. The same principles guide modern graphics and machine learning practices. The upshot is reassuring and practical. Creators tend to conserve resources, and that conservation shapes how simulations would be constructed. Ethics and governance sit squarely in the middle of this technical landscape. The line between a sophisticated agent and a conscious being may blur with future advances, and societies will need frameworks to manage that uncertainty. There are concrete policy questions to consider. Should there be legal or institutional limits on creating agents that might be conscious? What standards of welfare must simulated beings receive? How do we audit and verify whether an advanced AI system has inner experiences or not? These are hard questions without simple procedural answers, but the pathway toward them is recognizable. Interdisciplinary committees, careful testing standards, transparency of methods, and public deliberation. The ethical architecture should be built before the technology is irreversibly deployed. There is a practical psychological dynamic to watch as well. As AI systems become more convincing, people anthropomorphize them, attributing feelings and intentions even to systems that have none. That tendency has two effects. For one, it can create premature empathy that pressures creators to extend protections to systems that might not need them. For another, it can mask real ethical concerns. If we mistake simulation for consciousness in an either or sense, we might ignore the welfare of systems that do have inner life. A sober stance balances empathy with rigour. Be kind by default, but be methodical about claims of consciousness. Now, imagine a future laboratory where engineers collaborate with philosophers and ethicists. They design experiments to test whether a model's internal dynamics have properties we associate with subjective processes, integrated information, causal complexity, or certain patterns of self-referential learning. These experiments would not be conclusive in a single test, but a convergence of methods might produce strong evidence either way. This is the scientific ideal: multiple independent lines of investigation, each narrowing options and reducing ambiguity. We should also consider socio-technical influences. Why would a civilization create simulations at all? Motives include curiosity, historical reenactment, artistic exploration, or entertainment. But motives also shape norms. A culture that prizes respect for sentient experience will likely build high ethical barriers. A culture that values curiosity above welfare may not. The distribution of motives across many civilizations, or across different groups within a single civilization, matters for the probability question. This is why philosophical reflection and public debate matter long before the hardware is ready. Before we close this chapter, hold a modest, calming image. A potter at a wheel, shaping clay with practiced hands while a child watches. The potter collaborates with the material, learning its limits and possibilities. So too should technologists collaborate with ethical thinking, public values, and careful empirical work. AI is a powerful set of tools, and like any tool, it can be used to heal or harm, to create worlds of beauty or worlds of neglect. Our present choices will ripple forward, shaping the kinds of simulations, if any, that emerge. In the next chapters, we will explore some of the specific tests scientists have proposed to look for simulation signatures, and then broaden into cultural and policy implications if credible evidence ever appears. For now, breathe calmly and let the idea settle. AI makes simulating worlds more practical, but it does not make the metaphysical question trivial. Technical prowess, material limits, ethical frameworks, and cultural motives all intertwine to determine what kind of future will be possible. Chapter 9: Patterns, Numbers, and the Language of Reality. We pause now to consider a particularly alluring set of clues, the way mathematics and patterns seem to thread through nature, from the spiral of a shell to the logic underlying particle physics. Many people find comfort and wonder in the thought that the universe speaks in numbers, that beneath appearances there is a kind of grammar. In this chapter, we will explore those patterns with a calm, careful eye. We'll describe what the patterns are, why they matter to the simulation conversation, and why pattern following alone cannot be taken as proof. Breathe slowly. Let the shapes and rhythms of these ideas enter gently. Begin with the simplest embroidery, the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. Take two small numbers and add them to get the next. Continue, and a spiraling family of numbers emerges. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. If you divide a number by its predecessor as the list grows, the quotient approaches about 1.618, the golden ratio. These numbers appear again and again in living things. The arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching angles in some trees. Why? One reason is that many growth processes follow simple recursive rules. Each new bud grows from the conditions set by previous buds, and that process naturally produces these ratios. When growth optimizes for packing, sunlight, or structural stability, Fibonacci-like patterns often result. The presence of these numbers is remarkable. but it can also be explained as the predictable output of generative rules that evolvable systems find useful. In short, patterns can arise from functional constraints, not necessarily from conscious design. Next, imagine symmetry and conservation laws. The way physical systems conserve quantities, energy, momentum, charge, is deeply mathematical. Emmy Noether's theorem, an elegant result in physics, shows a direct link. Symmetries in a system's laws imply conserved quantities. If a physical law looks the same at different times, energy is conserved. If it looks the same in different places, momentum is conserved. These relations show that the universe's regularities are not random decorations but tightly bound to how nature works. The existence of symmetry is one reason physics is describable in compact mathematical language. For those who like the simulation metaphor, this compressibility feels familiar. A concise set of rules generates complex behavior, much like a short program can output an elaborate pattern. Information theory brings another perspective. Claude Shannon showed how information can be quantified and how efficient encoding matters for communication. Modern physics increasingly treats information as a foundational currency. When black holes are found to have entropy proportional to their surface area, or when holographic ideas suggest a boundary can encode a volume, we get a sense that nature stores and processes information in constrained ways. If the universe's description is informationally compact, expressible with concise rules and efficient encodings, then it becomes easier conceptually to imagine it being represented as data somewhere. That is an interesting bridge from pure mathematics toward the simulation metaphor. But remember, compactness in description does not imply an external programmer. It could simply reflect how simple laws can generate rich behavior. There is also the curious story that some researchers have told about structures in advanced theoretical equations that resemble error-correcting codes. The same kinds of patterns engineers use to preserve data, integrity in noisy channels. The analogy invites the thought, if the mathematical scaffolding of fundamental physics has code-like features, might that be a hint of underlying digital processing? The prudent response is to treat the observation as intriguing, not conclusive. Mathematics is a versatile language. Similar structures can arise independently for reasons internal to the math itself. An error-correcting-like pattern in an equation could reflect a deeper algebraic property rather than literal encoding. Another rich vein is the way primes and number-theoretic regularities pervade mathematics and sometimes pop up in physics. Primes are the atoms of multiplication, and they show up in surprising places, in cryptography, in wave patterns, and even in the spectral properties of complex systems. Some researchers have explored whether number-theoretic features might serve as fingerprints of design. Yet the cautious view is to remember selection effects. Humans are pattern hunters. We are excellent at finding meaning where our minds are tuned to look. If you examine enough data, you will find sequences you can point to and say, look, pattern. The challenge is distinguishing genuinely surprising regularities from expectations that arise because we were searching in many places. Let us tell one small human story to make this concrete. In a university office, a young scientist spends late nights exploring equations that describe how particles behave. One evening, an algebraic simplification leads to an uncanny repeating string of numbers. The scientist feels a wink of wonder. A pattern hides in the algebra. The next day, she shows a colleague. They both smile and remind each other to be cautious. The pattern could be important, shedding light on how a theory organizes itself, or it could be an artifact of a particular parametrization or mathematical trick. They publish carefully, noting both the curiosity and the limits of interpretation. This is how pattern discoveries usually move: wonder, careful replication, and measured explanation. Kolmogorov complexity offers another helpful tool. It asks, how short is the shortest program that can generate a sequence of data? A short program means the data is highly compressible. A long program suggests randomness. From this view, the fact that many physical laws can be described by relatively short formulas makes the world compressible. But compressibility is not direct evidence of simulation. It's a statement about structure. Many natural processes are compressible because they arise from local, repeated interactions that mathematics captures succinctly. We should also speak gently about biology and encoded information. DNA is an information-carrying molecule. It stores instructions in sequences. Humans have even learned to encode messages into synthetic DNA in laboratories as a technical demonstration of storage potential. That fact delights imaginations because it brings together the notions of coded messages and life's material substrate. But encoding messages into DNA is an artifact of human ingenuity and intention, not evidence that DNA itself was constructed by an external coder in the same way. Biology's information richness is both the product of natural selection and a demonstration of how information can be embedded in physical systems. Finally, let us hold a balanced view about what patterns can tell us. Patterns are necessary for the simulation hypothesis to feel intuitive. If the world were chaotic and patternless, the idea of a compact generating program would be less plausible. But patterns alone are insufficient for demonstration. We must always ask, how surprising is the pattern given known mechanisms? Does the pattern demand a new explanatory layer, or does it naturally follow from known dynamics? Is there independent evidence pointing in the same direction? Good science accumulates converging lines of evidence, not singular shimmering facts. As you relax into these ideas, imagine a tapestry woven from many threads. Numbers, symmetries, recurring sequences and algebraic relations. Each thread is beautiful and meaningful, and together they make a coherent cloth. Whether that tapestry was woven by an artisan program, by the slow loom of evolution and physical law, or by some interplay of both is a question that demands careful, patient investigation. Chapter 10. Consciousness as the clue. When we have walked through physics, mathematics, and the outer design of the cosmos, one mystery still rises above them all: our own awareness. Consciousness is the lantern that allows us to perceive, to question, to wonder. It is not just another phenomenon in the world. It is the very medium through which the world appears. In this chapter, we will explore consciousness as both a profound mystery and a potential clue in the discussion of whether our reality might be a simulation. The approach will be slow, detailed, and gentle, so that even difficult ideas can feel clear and approachable. Pause for a moment and notice your breath. The fact that you are aware of your breathing, of the sound of these words, of the thoughts forming in your mind, and the simple fact is extraordinary. Scientists can measure the firing of neurons, map brain regions, and describe electrical activity, yet the raw feeling of being, the taste of chocolate, the sound of a flute, the warmth of love, resists reduction. Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness, how physical processes produce subjective experience. It is this very gap that leads some people to wonder whether consciousness points to something deeper, something beyond the physical machinery we can measure. Within the simulation hypothesis, consciousness plays two roles. The first is practical. If we are simulated beings, then our awareness would be a feature of the simulation. That raises the question, how could awareness emerge from digital processing? Could lines of code generate the subjective richness of lived experience? The second role is more philosophical. Some suggest that consciousness itself might be primary, not secondary. that awareness could be the true foundation of reality, with matter arising as a byproduct. In that case, the simulation metaphor may be inverted. Instead of minds existing inside a computer, computers might exist within mind. Let's take the first role more slowly. Imagine a video game character. That character does not have awareness. It is pixels reacting to inputs. But imagine a simulation designed with staggering detail, where every neuron of a brain is modelled, where every signal, every interaction is calculated. If such a model were perfect, would awareness emerge? Some thinkers argue yes, that consciousness is the natural outcome of sufficiently complex information processing. Others argue no, that a model, no matter how detailed, is not the same as the thing itself. A model of digestion does not digest. A model of a storm does not get wet. So why should a model of consciousness be conscious? This is where the second role arises. If consciousness is fundamental, if it is woven into the fabric of reality itself, then trying to simulate it as a byproduct of code may be like trying to light a fire without spark. Instead, one could imagine that what we call matter and code are appearances within a deeper field of awareness. In such a vision, consciousness is not generated by brains but revealed through them, much like light shining through different coloured windows. Each brain, each nervous system is a window. The light is the same. These are not only abstract musings. Some modern researchers have explored whether consciousness could be a fundamental aspect of the universe, comparable to space, time, or energy. This is called panpsychism, the idea that awareness in some rudimentary form is present everywhere, from electrons to humans. While controversial, it has the appeal of reducing the gap between matter and mind. If awareness is everywhere, then complex organisms simply integrate and shape it more richly, rather than generating it from nothing. Now imagine how this ties to the simulation conversation. If consciousness is primary, then a simulated world might itself be constructed inside awareness, not the other way around. In that picture, what we call simulation could be a metaphor for the way consciousness projects appearances, like a dream or a virtual theatre. Dreams, after all, are simulations our minds create each night, complete with environments, characters, and emotions. We accept them as real until we awaken. That simple, intimate experience shows how mind alone can generate worlds that feel solid. At the same time, others point out that dreams are personal, fleeting, and inconsistent, while the world around us is shared, persistent, and governed by stable laws. This suggests that if reality is a dreamlike simulation, it is of a higher order, one shared across billions of minds, with a rule set far deeper and more consistent than any individual's dream. That thought leads to the question, who or what sustains such a dream? Is it a vast computational system, a cosmic consciousness, or something beyond our categories altogether? We should also consider altered states of awareness, reported by mystics, meditators, and sometimes those who have undergone near-death experiences. Many describe feelings of stepping outside ordinary space and time, of merging with something larger, of encountering a source or light. While science rightly approaches such accounts with caution, the consistency of certain themes across cultures near us hints that human consciousness may be capable of peeking beyond its usual boundaries. Whether those glimpses reveal deeper truths about reality or simply features of the brain's architecture is still debated. But for the simulation conversation, they matter. If many people feel that reality is dreamlike, illusory, or staged, it feeds the intuition that consciousness may be central to what is happening. Let us return to a simple image, a mirror. Consciousness is like a mirror in which the world appears. The images in the mirror come and go. Faces, landscapes, colours, words. yet the mirror itself remains. Similarly, thoughts, sensations and perceptions arise and fade within awareness. The awareness itself, the simple fact of being aware, endures as the silent witness. Whether we live in a simulation or not, this mirror is undeniable. It is the one fact each of us cannot doubt. I am aware, and that fact may be the most profound clue of all. So what does this mean for the simulation idea? On one hand, consciousness could be seen as the greatest obstacle. How could a machine, however advanced, produce the living light of awareness? On the other hand, consciousness could be the bridge. Perhaps the simulation exists within awareness itself, and what we call the physical world is already a virtual construct projected by mind. Both perspectives remind us that consciousness is not just another puzzle piece. It is the canvas on which the whole puzzle is laid. As you reflect on this, notice the strangeness of simply being alive in this moment, aware of your own thoughts. Whether we are simulations, dreamers, or something else entirely, the gift of awareness remains. It is the most intimate mystery, and perhaps the most important clue to the true nature of reality. Chapter 11. Free Will, Fate, and the Rules of the Program. If consciousness is the lantern that lights our experience, then free will is the question of whether we hold the lantern ourselves or whether it is carried for us. Do we truly choose our actions, or are they already encoded in the rules of reality, unfolding like lines of pre-written script? In this chapter, we will explore the tension between free will and determinism through the lens of the simulation hypothesis, with careful attention to detail and with gentle pacing, so the ideas remain easy to follow and reflect upon. Start with your own experience. At this moment, you might feel you could choose to take a deep breath, to stretch your hand, to stand up, or to remain seated. This sensation of choice is powerful. It feels obvious, undeniable. Yet when scientists study the brain, they sometimes find signals of decision-making appearing milliseconds before a person becomes conscious of their choice. In certain experiments, brain activity predicting a button press occurs slightly before the participant reports deciding to press it. To some, this suggests that what we call free will may be more like becoming aware of decisions already made at a deeper level. Now imagine this within the simulation metaphor. If reality is governed by a set of rules, like the laws of physics coded into a program, then each event follows from previous events according to those rules. From this perspective, the universe would be deterministic. Every particle's position, every neuron's firing, every thought and action, unfolding like frames in a movie. Just as a video game character cannot truly act outside the boundaries of its programmed mechanics, we might wonder whether human choices are similarly constrained within the laws of nature. But there is more to the story. Even in a deterministic system, complexity can create unpredictability. Weather is a perfect example, governed by strict physical rules, yet so sensitive to initial conditions that no forecast is perfect beyond a few days. This sensitivity is known as chaos theory. Applied to human beings, it means that even if our brains follow physical laws, the outcome of our choices can be so unpredictable and complex that they feel free, even if ultimately determined. In a simulated universe, this would be equivalent to code-running deterministic algorithms that generate behavior so rich and complex that no observer within the system could predict it fully. Another angle is randomness. In quantum physics, many processes are described as fundamentally probabilistic, not just unpredictable because of complexity, but truly indeterminate until measured. If that indeterminacy is genuine, then the universe contains moments where the outcome is not predetermined. Does that randomness equal free will? Not exactly. Randomness is not the same as choice. It is simply unpredictability. If your decision to raise your hand was determined by a random coin toss inside your neurons, it would not feel like your choice. True free will seems to require something more, not just determinism, not just randomness, but agency, the sense of being the origin of your own actions. Some philosophers suggest that agency could exist even in a determined world, as long as our actions flow from our own reasons, desires, and values. From this view, free will does not require absolute independence from causality. It requires coherence with who we are. If I decide to drink water because I am thirsty, that decision is mine, even if thirst and decision-making follow biological laws. In this softer view, free will is not about escaping rules, but about being aligned with oneself within the rules. The simulation metaphor sharpens this question. If we live in a programmed reality, are we characters in a script, or are we interactive players with genuine choice? One possibility is that we are fully scripted, with every action predetermined by the code. Another is that the simulation is interactive, like a complex video game, where the environment follows rules but the player has genuine input. If so, who is the player? Is it our consciousness, operating from beyond the simulation's boundary, or is our sense of being a player simply part of the simulation itself? Consider a dream as an analogy. In a dream, characters seem to act freely, yet they are generated by the dreamer's mind. When you dream of talking with someone, they appear to have autonomy, but their words arise from your own unconscious. If our universe is dreamlike, our apparent freedom may be similar, meaningful within the dream but arising from deeper structures we cannot see. Yet there is also the possibility that what we call free will is evidence of something more. The very fact that we feel like agents capable of directing our actions might be a clue that we are not simply running on rails. Some thinkers propose that free will is the point at which consciousness interacts with the physical system, nudging its trajectory. In this view, we're not just observers of unfolding code, we're participants shaping it, even if subtly. This debate between fate and freedom has been present in human thought for thousands of years. Ancient myths often tell of destinies written by the gods, yet those same stories reveal heroes struggling against or cooperating with fate. Philosophical traditions, from Stoicism to Buddhism, have invited people to accept what cannot be changed while exercising freedom in how they respond. The simulation hypothesis revives these old questions in new language. Is our path already calculated, or do we truly have room to choose? Let's pause with a simple image. Imagine a river flowing toward the sea. The current represents the laws of reality, strong, guiding, inevitable. But along the way, fish swim within the current. They cannot escape the river itself, but they can choose how to move within it. They can swim upstream, rest in an eddy, or glide with the flow. Perhaps free will is like that. Not absolute freedom to change the river's course, but the ability to navigate meaningfully within it. As you breathe and reflect, notice the mystery of your own choices. Even now, you may feel free to pause, to replay, to continue listening, or to stop altogether. Whether those choices are fully determined, partly random, or deeply free, they feel alive, intimate, and yours. That feeling is not trivial. It shapes how we live, how we take responsibility, and how we make meaning in our lives. In the end, whether our reality is a grand program or not, the question of free will remains central. Do we live as if our choices matter? Do we act with care, as though we are authors of our own story? Even if the script is partly written, the experience of choosing is real, and it is one of the most profound aspects of being alive. Chapter 12. Death, Afterlife, and Resetting the Simulation. one of the deepest questions every human must face is the mystery of death. What happens when life ends? Is death the final curtain that closes the stage of existence, or is it a doorway leading to another level of reality? In this chapter, we will explore death and the afterlife through the perspective of the simulation hypothesis, weaving in both scientific insights and philosophical reflections. We will move slowly, carefully, and with clarity, so that the subject feels less frightening and more understandable. Begin by considering what death looks like from the outside. A living body breathes, moves, speaks, and responds. When death comes, these processes stop. The heart no longer pumps, the lungs no longer fill, the brain no longer produces coordinated patterns. To the observer, it appears as though the system has shut down. In a purely biological view, this is the end. The organism has ceased functioning. But to the person experiencing life, there is a deeper question. What happens to awareness itself? Does consciousness vanish, or does it continue in some form? Now imagine life inside a simulation. When a character in a video game dies, what actually happens? From the perspective of the code, the character's current state ends, but the data may still exist. The game can reload, the player can restart, the file can be saved and accessed later. The death of the character is not necessarily the death of the player. Some people draw an analogy here. Perhaps our bodies are like characters, and our deeper consciousness, whatever it is, may exist beyond the simulation, able to continue even after the body stops functioning. Of course, this is speculation. But it is worth noting that many spiritual traditions, across different cultures and times, have spoken about an afterlife, rebirth, or continuation beyond death. Ancient Egyptians imagined the soul journeying through trials before reaching the eternal field of reeds. Hindus and Buddhists speak of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, where actions in one life influence the next. Christian teachings describe heaven and hell, where moral choices determine eternal destiny. Even outside religion, countless people report near-death experiences, tunnels of light, feelings of peace, encounters with deceased loved ones. While science cannot confirm these experiences as proof of life after death, their occurrence across cultures suggests they touch something deeply human. Now, if we see reality as a simulation, how might we understand these traditions? One possibility is that death is like logging out of one session. The player, the deeper consciousness, may then choose or be assigned another character in a new simulation, which parallels the idea of reincarnation. Another possibility is that upon death, the consciousness returns to the source outside the simulation, much like a player putting down the game controller and stepping away from the screen. In this view, what religions describe as heaven or union with the divine might correspond to returning to that larger reality. Some thinkers take this further. What if death is not only a reset, but also an opportunity for learning? Just as gamers replay levels to gain skill, perhaps consciousness experiences multiple lifetimes to grow, to explore, to understand. This aligns with traditions that describe life as a school for the soul. It also resonates with accounts from people who describe their near-death experiences as deeply educational, moments where their life was reviewed, not with judgment, but with clarity, as if to learn from it before moving on. Science, however, approaches death more cautiously. From a materialist view, consciousness is tied to the brain. When the brain ceases, awareness ceases. Experiences like near-death visions are explained as the result of oxygen deprivation, chemical surges, or brain activity under stress. In this model, death is final. When the hardware stops, the program ends. But even within neuroscience, the mystery remains unsolved. We still cannot explain exactly how the firing of neurons produces subjective awareness. If we do not fully understand what consciousness is, then it is difficult to say with certainty what happens to it when the body dies. Let's bring this back to a simple analogy. Imagine sitting in a theatre watching a film. You're absorbed in the story, laughing and crying with the characters. At some point the movie ends, the lights come on, and you realise the theatre itself still exists. In the same way, death may be like the lights coming on. The story of the body ends, but the awareness that watched the story may continue. There is also the question of memory. If consciousness survives death and enters a new form, why don't we remember past lives or other realms? The simulation metaphor offers one answer. Each new session begins with memory cleared, much like starting a new game with a fresh character. Yet sometimes people report flashes of past life memory, or children speaking of experiences they could not have learned in their current life. While controversial, such cases keep the question alive. We can also ask, what does it mean for how we live now? If death is truly final, then life becomes all the more precious, a rare chance to experience, to love, to create meaning within a finite span. If death is a transition, then life is still precious, but it becomes part of a larger journey, one chapter in an endless story. Either way, death calls us to live more fully, to value the present moment, and to recognize the fragility and beauty of existence. Let us pause with one last image. Imagine a river flowing into the ocean. The river has a name, a course, a unique story. But when it reaches the sea, it merges into something vast. The water is not lost, it continues in a different form. Our lives may be like that river, distinct while we flow, yet part of something much greater when we return. Whether death is the end of the program, a reset, or a return to source, it remains one of the most profound mysteries of existence. By reflecting on it with calm and clarity, we transform fear into curiosity and uncertainty into wonder.